Hello, BookTube. As you know, November is the month of the official Read What You Own challenge. This was created by Ollie at Criminali, and he is abetted by Crystal at Fiber Artsy, and Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads, and MJ at Reading This Life. And the challenge is exactly what it says. Read a chunk of the books you already own before you buy any more new books. At first, when this idea has floated around on BookTube, I rebelled against it, just instinctively, without really thinking about it. Because, obviously, as you know if you watch this channel, I'm no stranger to the joy of hunting and buying books. I love it. I think it's fantastic. I do it all the time. And it wasn't until the whole idea of reading what you own on BookTube really started to take flight that I became aware of the fact, the extent of the problem, of people who also love to buy books, but then chuck them on a pile and never look at them again, with the result that they have dozens or hundreds or thousands of unread books in their homes. And they just keep buying more books. Once I realized the extent of that problem, all the instinctive resistance I had to any kind of Read What You Own challenge went out the window. Absolutely out the window. And you don't know what that phrase means because you have long since blocked all your windows with bookcases and piles of books. I am perfectly willing to subscribe to the idea that people have said on this channel and off this channel in the bookish world that buying books and reading books are two different hobbies. Perfectly willing to accept that. But it is nevertheless wrong. Buying a book with no intention of reading it is wrong. It's a wrong thing to do. And having hundreds or even thousands of books that you haven't read, that go from year to year to year, sometimes from apartment to apartment, from house to house, off their current shelves, into boxes, across town, out of the boxes, up on new shelves, all without ever reading them, that's blasphemous. Absolutely blasphemous. That is directly contradictory to living as an active reader, as a person who loves reading. So I have been watching the Read What You Own videos as they've been coming out. I think they're fascinating. I don't need to do a Read What You Own challenge myself. As you know, if you've watched any of the library tours that I've done here at Hyde Cottage, the number of unread books I have is very small. I have a lot of print and paper books, but the number of them that I'm just carting around from place to place or keeping from month to month without ever reading, with them just sitting there on the shelf looking at me while I buy new books, that number is extremely small. Some of the books that I have that I haven't read are new releases. I tend to read new releases chronologically. I tend to read them in their release date month in order. So usually, I certainly won't have any April, for instance. I'm filming this video in November. I certainly won't have any April review copies or finished copies that are here that are unread. There are books from April that I haven't read, but anything that I received here at Hyde Cottage, I have read from those months. And almost all the stuff I have from November is read. It's still on the shelf because I need to reread a lot of it, and I will when I get finished copies. But that is a for instance, right? I have lots of December books that I haven't read. I have lots of January books that I haven't read, and February books that I haven't read. But that's I think, an exception. The date is printed right on the book, and I have a directly professional reason to be putting them off. I'm certainly not going to keep them for months or years without reading them. I am going to read every book on that bookcase. But the rest of it, the stuff that isn't review copies, I burn through it and then decide whether or not I want to keep it, whether or not I want to put it on a shelf out in the rest of Hyde Cottage or here in the little book room. I don't certainly get books and then just chuck them on the shelf and ignore them. I don't understand that at all. It makes me grateful for the Read What You Own challenge. It also makes me happy to see how many people are taking up that challenge at the behest of its hosts. And one of those people is Fred at Read by Fred. And he made a video today that I want to respond to. I want to talk about the Read What You Own challenge, but I also want to respond to Fred's video. I'll leave a link to it down below. He's absolutely wonderful. As you know, if you subscribe to his channel, he's absolutely wonderful. You should subscribe to his channel. Uh, but he made a video about his rules of engagement for the Read What You Own challenge in November. And it was a happy and smiling and welcoming video. And as with all Canadian things that are happy and smiling and welcoming, underneath that so courteous, so friendly Canadian veneer was pure evil. I want to tell you about Fred's 4 rules of engagement for the Read What You Own challenge. First, I want to preface this with a comment that he makes comments at the beginning of his video and at the end of his video, and both these comments form a trouble sandwich. They form a trouble sandwich because they are both where he goes wrong. The first comment that he makes at the beginning of his video is that it's totally up to you how you play the Read What You Own challenge game. That is not true. It's totally up to me how you play that game. Okay? What, did I miss the memo that Book 2 became a democracy? No. It's totally up to me. Clearly, Fred did not get that memo because he gives his 4 rules for the Read What You Own challenge. Number 1 is that he's going to read 40 books, which may seem like a lot, or in many of your cases, not much at all. But Fred is not only a slow reader, but also a fairly self-controlled book buyer. He has fewer than 500 books in his collection total, not 500 unread books, not 500 books on the Erie Canal alone, like a certain person up in Vermont I could name, but just 500 books. So 40 is a big thing. I think he mentioned in the video that he has 45 unread books, so he's planning on reading almost all of his unread books before he buys anything new, which is great. That caused me to raise my hands for a rare burst of applause at anything Canadian, but then he got to his other rules. Rule number 2 is exceptions. He's not going to buy any books while he's reading those 40 books, but he has exceptions. Number 1 is work. Books that he has to buy for work. Now, I don't know what Fred does for a living, but if his bosses ever go up to him and say, as a condition of your employment at this firm, you must buy this book, I'm the czar of all the Russias. I don't think there's any book buying for work. I don't think that's true for anybody anywhere. If it were true, it would be a legitimate exception. Obviously. Like, for instance, if I were doing the 40-book challenge, I would obviously have to exempt the books I get in the mail from publishers that I have been commissioned to review. I obviously have to. I'm not buying those books, but I reading what you own already as opposed to new arrivals, I would have to exempt those because that's work related. I don't know. I'll give Fred a pass on this one, but I certainly won't give him a pass on his next exception, because the other exception that he has in his second rule is textbooks. Fred is a geek. By his own admission, he's a nerd. He's a geek. He likes to read textbooks. And he mentions with open admission in his video that he will continue to buy textbooks during his Read What You Own challenge. Because they aren't real books. Because they aren't meant to be read sequentially from beginning to end, because he'll pick at and peck at them depending on subject matter. I might be willing to grant him a mulligan for the first one, if his job actually requires him. Hey, here's this book. You weren't going to buy it or read it, but now we're telling you to or you're fired. If that's true, then he would have to make that exception. But the second one? The second one is no exception at all. Textbooks are in Fred's case, as unbelievable as it seems, they are being bought for fun, for enjoyment. All books bought for enjoyment count for the 400 for the Read What You Own challenge. All books bought for enjoyment count. It doesn't matter if you're reading them chapter 1, then chapter 2, then chapter 3. Textbooks definitely count. And he was talking about spending no more than $20 on one book, and textbooks aren't small. Anyway, those were his 2 exceptions to his book buying ban. Then he comes up with more exceptions. And the third one really chapped my hide, as most things Canadian do. He said that if he DNFs a book, so if one of those 40 books he pulls off the shelf that he already owns, pulls it down off the shelf, starts to read it, and doesn't like it. One chapter, 2 chapters, doesn't want to finish it. So he DNFs it, which is our BookTube lingo for did not finish. And chucks it back on the shelf. He says that counts towards the challenge. It most certainly does not. It most certainly does not. It's read what you own. It's not think about reading what you own. It's not dip a toe in reading what you own. It's read what you own. If you get that book and if you pull it down off the shelf and you DNF it after a chapter or 2 chapters, it doesn't count. You haven't read it. You've put it right back where it was. You haven't fixed this problem at all. And then there's his 4th rule, which is that box sets and books in series don't count. Excuse me? Why on earth would box sets and books in series not count? The closest that Fred comes to offering an explanation for this is that he's bought at least one book set that looked nice on his shelf. Every book in a book series or a box set starts with Once Upon a Time and ends with The End. Every book is its own thing. So books in series and box sets certainly count. Each individual book counts as an individual book. With exceptions like these, who needs scofflaws? The problem with these exceptions comes from the misconception that is one bun of our misunderstanding sandwich, which is the one that I mentioned, where it's totally up to you how you want to play this game. It is not. It is totally up to me how you want to play this game. And so, to help with the poor souls wandering in the Canadian wilderness, I thought I would offer 4 rules instead of Fred's. It's my own rules of engagement for Read What You Own November, even though I am not participating. I'm still watching all sorts of people participate, and I strongly urge that everyone should participate. If you have more, let's use Fred as a benchmark. If you have more than 40 books that are unread on your shelves, it is insane for you to be buying new books. If you have more than 40, you are setting yourself down a path. And if you have more than 400 or 4,000, you are well down that path to not caring that you buy books and having effectively no intention of ever reading them, which is insane. Not just in terms of storage and weight and inconvenience, but just in terms also of reducing your reading self-control to a joke. So let's impose Steve's 4 rules, shall we, for the rules of engagement for the Read What You Own challenge. Number 1 is that all books count. There are no exceptions at all. No self-published books, no gifts from people, no nothing. We're talking about, is a book on your shelf? Yes or no? Have you read it? Yes or no? If the answer to the first is yes, and the answer to the second is no, it counts. I don't care if it came to you as a gift from a booktuber. I don't care if it came to you from Queen Victoria. If you have an unread book on your shelf, it counts. And Steve's rule number 2 is that sampling doesn't count. You have to read the books on your shelves. Who hasn't sampled from the 400 or 4,000 books they have unread on their shelves? Of course you have. The point is to read them. Now, Fred says in his video, I've only got one life to lead. It's too short to force myself to read books that aren't doing it for me. Okay. All right, but you bought them, and the you who bought them was enthusiastic for them, thought they belonged on the shelf. I would argue that forcing yourself to read those books instead of DNFing them is properly Catholic penance. It will teach you. It will refine your self-control. If you force yourself to read a book that an earlier you thought was nice enough to pay money for, and you hate it the whole time, well, maybe you'll be less likely to listen to your impulses when you're out buying books. Just perhaps. But I know I've said on this channel many, many times, you absolutely should DNF a book you're not liking. You absolutely should do that. But does it go back on the shelf if you do that? If you DNF the book as part of your attempt to add it to your Read What You Own challenge, do you put it back on the shelf? Is it likely that you will pick it up in a year or 2 years and not DNF it again? Was it in fact a mistake to acquire? But anyway, sampling doesn't count anyway. If you take a book down and you DNF it, it does not count for your whatever numerical challenge you set for yourself because you haven't read it. Then Steve rule number 3. Let's get down to brass tacks here for these last 2 rules, shall we? Steve rule number 3. Fred says, and Ollie has said, pick a number. There are different tiers for the Read What You Own challenge. Fine, that's great. There's only one number that really counts: 40%. You should read 40% of your unread books before you buy another book. I'm not saying that you have to read that 40% in the month of November, although that wouldn't kill you, or maybe it would, considering some of you and the hoarding that you do, maybe it would. What I want you to do, you should have a count of your books anyway. If you don't have a count of your books, you are opening the door to just amassing mountains of unread and unreadable books that you're never intending to remember, books that you don't even remember you own. So you should have a count of your books. That should be number 1. Count how many books you have. Then take that number, use Google Calculator to get what 40% of that total is. That number is the number of books that you already own that you should read for the Have You Read Challenge. You should read 40% of your unread books. So count the number of books you own, then count the number of books you own that haven't read. Maybe put a little sticky notes on them as you're counting the books. Get the number that you haven't read. Take that number that you haven't read. Get 40% of that number. That's what your total should be. That's what your goal should be. Not even half. A good solid chunk of your unread books. 40% of the books you haven't read that you own. I'm not talking here about time. I could zero in on the books you've had for more than a year. I could do that because, in my own opinion, you absolutely should not have a book on your shelf that you haven't read in a year, that you've had for a year without reading. That is crazy. That is absolutely crazy. You're not guaranteed another minute on this earth. You absolutely should not have a book on your shelf that has sat there unread for a year. And I know, because you've emailed me and sent me horrifying pictures, that a lot of you have hundreds or even thousands of books that have sat on your shelves for 10 years or more. That's insane. That is a loss of self-control to an insane extent. If I were talking about time periods instead of just percentages, I would say that. But I am definitely saying, get the total number of unread books on your shelf. Books in series count, box sets count, textbooks count, all of it counts. Count every individual book you haven't read on your shelf. Take 40% of that number. That should be your goal. And then there's Steve rule number 4, which is not part of Read What You Own. It's not part of the Read What You Own challenge. It's what you do on the day after the end of November, when you're done with the Read What You Own challenge. When you're done with that challenge, you should dispose of 30% of the books you own. The printed paper books you own, the ones that are on the shelves. You should dispose of 30% of that number. So again, you take the whole number, figure out on Google Calculator what 30% of that number is, and get rid of that number of books. Donate them, bring them to your little free libraries, give them away, sell them, however you do it. Get rid of that number. Because I think it guarantees, if you have more than, let's say, 40 books that are unread on your shelf, I guarantee you that you have dead weight on your shelves. Not just the books you haven't read, but a lot of the books that you have read that are just going to sit there without ever you going back to them, without ever anyone else going back to them. So that's a sort of a follow-up challenge to Read What You Own, is to get rid of, to unhaul a huge percentage, 30% of your collection should go. 30% of your collection is dead weight. But that's not a rule for engagement for Read What You Own. For Read What You Own, it's all books count. There are no exceptions whatsoever. Sampling books and then deciding to DNF them and counting them, no, they don't count. If you don't read the book, it doesn't count for Read What You Own. And it has to be 40% of the total number of unread books in your collection. You can't just pick and piddle here. That doesn't help at all. If you do the read what you own challenges, I know some of you are. 2 of you have admitted it in emails, that you are going to read, oh, I'm going to read like 3 or 4 books that I haven't read in my own collection. And oh, when November's over, I'm going to celebrate by going to your local charity shop and buying 100 books. It should be a significant proportion. It should be 30% of your unread books. There you go. Those are rules for engagement here for the Read What You Own challenge. And you might be wondering what the second bun of the misunderstanding sandwich is that's immortalized in Fred's video. Bun number 1 was it's totally up to you how you play this game. That's bun number 1. Then we have a whole bunch of misunderstandings. Box sets don't count? Of course they do. Every individual book counts. And then we have the second bun for the misunderstanding sandwich, which is how Fred ends his video. He says the point of the challenge is to have fun. No, that is not true. The point of the challenge is to temporarily forestall the fiery scorn of Steve. You'll still be the victim of that scorn eventually, but you can temporarily forestall the evil day by doing exactly what I say. So there you go. Those are some rules of engagement. I would love to know from you. I say I would love to know. I actually would love to know, but it's still going to horrify me. I would love to know how many of you are on Fred's side here. I am sure that more of you are on his side than are on mine. I'm sure that all of you have come up with weaselly little backdoor loopholes in the Read What You Own challenge that allow you to keep buying books. That allow you to keep doing the flaw at the heart of this whole event. I'm not saying to deprive yourself of the joy of buying books, but it should be in proportion to what you read. Not completely out of proportion to what you read. I mean, honestly, I've seen people on BookTube who make videos cheering and laughing about the great deal they got on a 100 box lot from eBay. And then in December, they report that they had a really good reading year. They read 55 books. So in one fell swoop, for $60, you bought enough books that would take you 2 years to read. You just chuck them on the pile. Just chuck them on the pile. You've already got hundreds and hundreds of books you haven't read already on the pile. You're going to add those too because it's fun. There's something deeply wrong at the heart of that dysfunction, at the heart of that disconnect. There's something deeply wrong. The Read What You Own challenge is trying to address that, but I want to know, you might as well tell me the loopholes that you're coming up with. I'm sure there are plenty. All I ever hear on Read What You Own challenge videos are people listing their loopholes. But anyway, I thought I would add a stern rejoinder to Fred's friendly video, which I'll leave a link to down below. You're all going to like his more than you like mine anyway. But anyway, I'm hoping that you're all having fun with the Read What You Own challenge. People have a problem. Anyway, I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.